Images. The boardroom was silent. The kind of silence that makes your heart thump louder than the ticking clock on the wall. A dozen executives sat frozen in their seats. Images. Their eyes darting between the CEO at the head of the table and the young woman standing before them, trembling but unbroken. And then it happened. Her voice cracked. Images. But the words cut through the silence like glass shattering. Malam. That's my dad's signature. For a moment, time seemed to stop. No one breathed. Images. The CEO's pen slipped from her hand, landing softly on the table as her eyes widened with disbelief. That was the moment everything began to change. It all started months earlier. Images. The young woman, Alina, had just started her first job at the company, a sprawling corporation known for its gleaming glass towers and ruthless efficiency. Images. She wasn't a glamorous new hire from a top university. She wasn't the kind of person people noticed in the hallways. Images. She was the janitor's daughter, the quiet girl who worked part-time in the records department. Images. Pushing files around while dreaming of one day breaking free from the invisible chains of class and circumstance. Every day. Images. She watched as executives in suits strolled past her like she was invisible. And every day, she reminded herself why she was there to prove that her father, Images, a humble janitor who had given his life to that company, was more than just the man who emptied their trash bins. Her father, Mr. Raza, had been with the company for 30 years. Images. He was known by everyone, not because of his position, but because of his quiet integrity and unshakable loyalty. He worked nights, holidays, and weekends without complaint. Images. And though no one ever praised him, he always returned home to his daughter with a smile, telling her, "Dignity, Alina, Images, is not in the work you do but in how you do it." Those words stayed with her like a compass. But one day, things took a turn that would shake their small world. Mr. Raza fell ill. His hands, Images, once steady, began to tremble. His voice, once filled with warmth, grew weaker. Medical bills piled up, and the company, the very place he had served for decades, denied his request for help. Images. They claimed there was no record of the promises once made to him in writing. Promises of support, of pension, of security. Alina's heart burned with anger. Images. She knew her father had signed documents long ago that guaranteed him those rights. She had heard him talk about them. But when she asked for copies, the files seemed to have vanished. Images. Buried deep or erased entirely. That was when she made a vow. She would not let her father's lifetime of service disappear into shadows. She would dig, she would search. Images. And she would find the truth. And so began her nights of quiet rebellion. After her shift, when most employees had gone home, Alina would slip into the dusty archives. Images. She combed through box after box, drawer after drawer, the smell of paper and ink filling her lungs. There were moments she wanted to give up, moments where despair whispered, "Images. You'll never win against them." But then she'd picture her father's frail hands, still trembling as he insisted she eat before him, still sacrificing for her even in sickness. And she pressed on. Weeks turned into months. And then, one night, with her eyes red from exhaustion, she found it. A file misfiled under the wrong year, the edges yellowed with time. Inside, Images, neatly stapled, was a document with her father's name signed at the bottom. A contract promising lifetime support and benefits. Images. A document that proved the company owed him more than they were willing to admit. Her hands shook as she held it, knowing she had uncovered something powerful. The next morning, Images. She stood before the CEO and the board, her heart racing but her voice steady. She placed the paper on the polished wooden table, her eyes meeting the CEO's with a mix of fear and fire. "This," she said, "is proof. Proof that my father's sacrifices weren't forgotten. Proof that this company once promised him the dignity he earned." The CEO frowned. Images, lifting the paper with a practiced indifference. But as her eyes scanned the page, her face paled. She reached the bottom, and there it was, the unmistakable signature. The room grew still. Images. All eyes locked on the revelation. And that's when Alina, with her voice breaking but her spirit unshaken, whispered the words that would pierce the CEO's heart. "Images. Mom, that's my dad's signature." The CEO's hand trembled as she set the paper down. Memories surfaced. She remembered that signature. She remembered Mr. Raza. Images. The janitor who had always greeted her with a smile when she was still just a junior manager. The man who once picked up the umbrella she had dropped in the rain without expecting a thank you. Images. And suddenly, the weight of years of choices, of overlooked humanity, crashed down on her. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked back at Alina. For the first time, images. The board saw not just an executive, but a woman shaken to her core by the realization of what they had done. She swallowed hard. Images. Her voice heavy with something no one in that room had heard before. Remorse. The resolution wasn't instant, nor was it easy. The company would need to answer for years of neglect. Images. For promises broken and lives overlooked. But that day marked a shift. That day, the janitor's daughter stood tall in a room full of power and privilege. Images. Forcing them to see the truth they had tried to bury. And as Alina walked out of the boardroom, the contract safely in her hands, she knew she hadn't just fought for her father. Images. She had fought for every unseen worker, every ignored voice, every person who had ever been made to feel invisible. Her father, frail but smiling, wept when she showed him the document. Images. You did it, Alina, he whispered. You gave me back my dignity. And she held his trembling hand, her own eyes brimming with tears. Because in that moment, images, she realized something profound. Sometimes the smallest voices, the ones dismissed as unimportant, carry the power to shake the world. Images. The story of the janitor's daughter spread through the company like wildfire, and beyond its walls, it inspired countless others. Not just about justice. Images. Not just about signatures on paper, but about the reminder that every human being, no matter their role, deserves respect, dignity, and the chance to be remembered not for what they did, images, but for how they lived. That was the story of the signature that made a CEO cry. The janitor's daughter was not supposed to be standing in that boardroom. At least, images. That's what everyone thought. A girl who once carried her father's lunch in a second-hand plastic bag, now faced down the most powerful executives in the company. Images. She wasn't dressed in designer suits like them, her clothes were plain, her hands calloused from late nights, spent flipping through boxes of forgotten files. Images. But there was something in her eyes that made even the most arrogant among them shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Her story had started much earlier. Images. Long before she walked into that building with trembling resolve. She had grown up in the narrow streets of a neighborhood where every wall was cracked and every rooftop leaked when it rained. Images. Life wasn't easy, but she always had her father. He would walk her to school before his night shifts, still smelling faintly of bleach and floor polish. Images. And he would tell her stories to make her forget the tired circles under his eyes. Remember this, Alina, he'd say, resting a calloused hand on her shoulder. Images. People may look down at what I do. They may laugh or ignore me. But no one can take away the honesty of my work. Images. That is my pride. Those words echoed in her heart as she watched her father grow weaker with every passing day. When his illness struck. Images. It wasn't just his body that failed. It was also the silence from the company he had served. They turned away, pretending he was just another name on a list. A replaceable cog. That broke Alina more than the unpaid bills ever could. So, she fought. At first, quietly. She wrote emails. She called HR. She asked managers who once nodded at her father in the hallways. Images. All she got were polite dismissals. We'll look into it. Unfortunately, records from that time aren't available. I'm sorry, images. But there's nothing we can do. But Alina didn't stop. She stayed long after the lights dimmed in the office. She searched dusty files while the world outside slept. Images. Security guards would nod at her with pity, but she never explained. She didn't need to. Every folder she touched, every yellowed paper she unfolded, was another promise to her father. Images. The breakthrough came on a night when her eyes burned so badly she could barely see the words in front of her. She had almost skipped over the folder, assuming it was useless. Images. But then she spotted an old stamp, smudged but familiar, the kind used decades ago. Her heart raced. She opened it, her hands trembling, and there it was, the contract. Images. It was more than paper. It was her father's dignity, locked away in the company's forgotten history. The next morning, she entered the boardroom with that file pressed to her chest. Images. Executives barely glanced at her, assuming she was some assistant delivering paperwork. But when she spoke, clear, firm, unyielding, the room shifted. Images. She laid down the contract and said the words that would leave the CEO in tears. Images. That's my dad's signature. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. And in that silence, Alina knew this was only the beginning. Images. The days after that meeting were not as easy as the single moment of victory might have suggested. The CEO, shaken and emotional in the boardroom. Image had promised to look into the matter. But corporations are not run on promises. They are run on policies, procedures, and politics. Images. Alina soon learned that some of the executives wanted the issue buried. Reinstating those old benefits will open the floodgates. One of them whispered, when he thought she wasn't listening. Do you know how many other workers might come forward? Images. It'll cost us millions. Others treated her with condescension, as though she were naive to believe she could fight such a machine. They smiled politely. Images. Told her to be patient, and then moved on with their day. But Alina had inherited her father's stubbornness. Patience was one thing, but silence was another. Images. She began speaking to other employees, listening to their stories. She found that her father was not alone. There were others, too. Retired workers, forgotten custodians, images. Old security guards. People who had once given their lives to the company, and had been discarded when they were no longer useful. She began to collect their voices, images. Writing down their testimonies, gathering whatever documents they had. The more she dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just about her father. Images. It was about a system that thrived on forgetting the very people who kept it alive. When she presented her findings to the CEO a second time, she expected more resistance. Instead, images. She found something she hadn't anticipated: remorse. The CEO, a woman hardened by years of competition and boardroom battles, seemed softer now. Images. Alina could see it in her eyes when she held the paper again. I remember your father. The CEO confessed quietly. He once helped me when I was just starting out here. Images. I was running in the rain, carrying files, and I slipped in the lobby. He helped me up and told me not to worry. I never forgot that kindness. Her voice faltered. The room, images, filled with executives who rarely showed emotion, fell into silence again. The CEO's eyes glistened with tears as she placed the contract back on the table. Images. This company has made mistakes, she admitted. But maybe it's time we correct them. What followed was not easy. Legal teams got involved. Policies were rewritten. Some resisted fiercely, calling it a dangerous precedent. But Alina did not back down. She had truth on her side, and now, unexpectedly, she had the CEO's reluctant support. Weeks later, images. The company made an announcement that shocked everyone. They were reinstating benefits for long-forgotten employees and creating a new fund in honor of workers like Mr. Raza. Images. The program would be called the Raza Initiative. When Alina told her father, his eyes filled with tears. His hands shook as he held hers. Images. I don't deserve this honor, he whispered weakly. But Alina only smiled through her own tears. You deserve more than this, Baba. You gave your life to them. Images. And now they finally see you. The day the fund was announced, the CEO herself visited their small home. She sat across from Mr. Raza. Images. No longer the untouchable figure at the top of the tower, but a woman humbled by the weight of her own decisions. She apologized, not with empty words, but with actions that carried meaning. Images. And in that moment, the janitor's daughter realized something profound. Change does not come easily, but sometimes one small voice can ignite a revolution. Images. Her father passed away months later, but not before hearing his name spoken with honor, not before knowing his dignity had been restored. Alina stood at his funeral. Images. Surrounded by people he had quietly touched. Co-workers, neighbors, even executives who came to pay respects. She looked out at the crowd and realized her father had been right all along. Images. Dignity was not in the work you do, but in how you do it. And because of that, images. Even the CEO of a giant corporation was left in tears by the memory of a janitor's simple kindness, and by the courage of his daughter, who refused to let him be forgotten. Images. The night after the announcement of the Raza Initiative, Alina sat by her father's bedside. He was weaker than ever, his breath shallow, but his spirit was calm. Images. The glow of a small lamp filled the room, casting shadows on the worn walls. "You fought for me, my daughter," he whispered, reaching for her hand. Images. "But more than that, you fought for every man and woman who thought they were forgotten." Alina blinked back tears. "I did it for you, Baba." Images. "You're my reason." He gave a faint smile. "Promise me one thing. Don't stop here. Use your voice. Use your courage. Change more than just my story." She nodded. But her heart ached. She didn't know if she had the strength to continue beyond him. Still, she whispered back, "I promise." 2 weeks later, her father was gone. The funeral was quiet, but the attendance stunned her. Dozens of employees, both past and present, came to pay respects. Old security guards, cafeteria workers, images. Even some executives who once overlooked him stood there, heads bowed. The CEO herself attended, standing in the back, her eyes downcast. When the service ended, she approached Alina. "Images. I owe your father more than I can ever repay," she said softly. "And I owe you an apology not as a CEO, but as a human being." Images. "We should never have let it come to this." Alina studied her for a moment. For the first time, images. The woman in front of her wasn't a distant figure of authority. She was just another person carrying regret. But change never comes without resistance. A month after her father's passing, images, Alina was called into a tense meeting. A group of shareholders had filed complaints against the new initiative, images, claiming it would drain company profits, and set a dangerous example. One man in a dark gray suit leaned forward, his tone sharp. "This program is unsustainable," he barked. Images. "What cannot reward janitors and low-level workers like their shareholders? It's not how corporations function." Alina felt anger rising in her chest. But before she could speak, images, the CEO raised a hand. "That janitor you dismiss so easily gave more to this company than most of us in this room ever will," she said firmly. Images. "His work may not have filled our balance sheets, but it built the floors you stand on." The room fell silent, but the battle was far from over. Images. Alina realized then that her father's fight had become hers. Determined, she began working on something bigger. Images. She met with employees at every level of the company, listening to their struggles, documenting their forgotten promises. She turned her evenings into gatherings, images, where cafeteria workers and maintenance crews shared their stories. Word spread quickly, and soon her tiny meetings became a movement. One night, images. An elderly man approached her after a gathering. His hands were rough, his back hunched, but his eyes glowed with hope. Images. "Your father once helped me carry heavy boxes when I was too weak," he said. "He didn't even know my name, but he stopped to help. Because of you." Images. His kindness will never be forgotten. Alina's heart swelled. Her father's spirit lived on in every story, every tear, every act of solidarity. But the pressure mounted. Images. The shareholders threatened lawsuits, the media began circling, and whispers spread that Alina was becoming a troublemaker. Some warned her to step back before she lost everything. Images. One night, sitting alone in her small apartment, she broke down. She questioned if she was strong enough. Her father was gone. The weight of expectations pressed heavily on her shoulders. Images. And then, as if carried on the wind, she remembered his words. "Dignity is not in the work you do, but in how you do it." The next morning, she stood taller. Images. When the shareholder case went public, Alina did something no one expected. She spoke directly at a shareholders' meeting. Cameras flashed, the press buzzed, but her voice didn't waver. Images. "My father's name is Raza," she began. "For 30 years, he mopped your floors, scrubbed your hallways, and kept your offices clean." Images. "He was invisible to most of you, but without him and people like him, this company could not exist. If you think honoring people like him is a waste of profit," images, "then you've forgotten the meaning of humanity. You've forgotten that success is not built only on numbers, but on people." Her words shook the room. The CEO, sitting behind her, images, placed a hand on the table, her own voice steady when she added, "She's right. This company doesn't just belong to its shareholders," images. "It belongs to every single person who built it." For the first time in years, the shareholders backed down. Not all of them, but enough. The Raza initiative not only survived, it expanded. Images. It became a model for other companies, spreading far beyond those glass towers. Workers began to be remembered, honored, and respected in ways they hadn't been before. Months later, images. Alina stood at the edge of the rooftop of the building where her father had worked his entire life. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold. Images. She held the original contract in her hand, the one with her father's fading signature. She whispered into the wind, "We did it, Baba. They see you now." Images. They see all of you. And though he was gone, she felt him there. In the glow of the sunset, in the hum of the city below, in every story that would never again be silenced. Images. It wasn't just about a janitor's signature anymore. It was about every invisible soul who had ever wondered if their work mattered. And thanks to one daughter's courage, images, the world would never forget. The months after the Raza initiative began were filled with hope. Workers who had long felt invisible now stood taller. Images knowing someone had finally spoken for them. Cafeteria staff smiled wider, janitors greeted her with grateful eyes. Images. And even some executives began acknowledging the people they once brushed past. But not everyone was pleased. Behind closed doors, powerful voices plotted against her. Images. Shareholders who had lost influence were bitter. Some executives resented the shift in attention from profits to people. Whispers followed Alina in hallways. She's only here because her father was a janitor. This isn't sustainable. She's ruining the company. One evening, as she packed up papers in her tiny office, images. A middle-aged executive named Mr. Daniels entered. His tie hung loose, his face lined with frustration. "You've stirred a hornet's nest, Alina," he said bluntly. Images. "Don't mistake a few victories for safety. You've embarrassed powerful people. They won't let this stand forever." Alina looked up, her chest tightening. Images. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to honor people like my father." Daniel sighed, shaking his head. "Idealism is dangerous in business. If you keep pushing images, they'll find a way to silence you." That night, she couldn't sleep. His warning echoed in her mind. She thought of her father, of his trembling hands, of his words about dignity. Fear clawed at her, but deeper than fear was resolve. She whispered into the darkness, "I won't stop." Her fight grew louder. She started speaking outside the company, images at community events, on small news outlets. Her story resonated with ordinary people everywhere. Soon she was invited to speak at a labor conference. Nervously, images. She stood before hundreds of workers, her voice echoing through the hall. "My father believed dignity isn't in the work you do, but in how you do it." Images. He believed every worker deserves respect. "I carry his voice, but I stand here for yours too. You are not invisible." Images. You are the backbone of everything built in this world. The applause that followed was thunderous. But the more attention she gained, the more enemies circled. Images. Articles appeared in major newspapers calling her a dangerous activist exploiting sympathy. A shareholder tried to file a case to dissolve the Raza initiative. Images. Painting it as financially reckless. Anonymous messages slipped under her door at night. "Stop before it's too late." For the first time, Alina felt fear crawl into her bones. Images. One night, she sat on the rooftop, where she once whispered to her father. Her hands shook as she clutched his contract. "What if they destroy everything, Baba?" she murmured. Images. "What if I fail?" And then, in the silence of the night, a memory of him surfaced so vividly it felt real. His smile, his voice, "Failing is not trying. And you, my daughter," images, "are still fighting." The next morning, she walked into the company's annual general meeting, an event televised live. The hall was packed with investors, reporters, and employees. Images. She was not supposed to speak, but when the CEO gestured for her to step forward, all eyes turned. Alina inhaled deeply and faced the sea of skepticism. "My name is Alina Raza." Images. "My father was a janitor here for 30 years. Many of you never knew his name, but you walked on the floors he polished. You worked late in the offices he cleaned. And when he was gone, images, you never noticed. But I did. And I won't let the world forget men and women like him. If that makes me a troublemaker, so be it. If that makes me a risk to your profits, so be it." Images. "But if even one worker is seen, valued, and remembered because of this fight, then it's worth everything." The hall was silent at first. Then, from the back rows, applause began. One worker stood. Then another, and another, Soon the sound swelled, rolling over the room like thunder. Even reporters joined in, their cameras flashing images. The shareholders who had plotted against her shifted uncomfortably. They knew, in that moment, they had lost. Public opinion was no longer in their favor. The CEO, her eyes wet with tears, images, leaned toward Alina as the applause roared. "Your father would be proud," she whispered. And Alina smiled, her voice trembling but strong as she whispered back, "Images. I know he is." The years that followed turned her into more than just the janitor's daughter. She became a symbol, a reminder that one voice, no matter how small, images, can ripple into something greater. The Raza initiative expanded beyond one company, inspiring reforms in others, sparking movements across industries. Images. Workers carried her story with them like a torch, lighting the dark corners where dignity had long been forgotten. On the anniversary of her father's passing, Alina returned to his grave. Images. She placed fresh flowers by the stone and laid the contract, the paper that had started it all, beside it. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "They see you now. Baba." Images. "And because of you, they see all of us." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying her words upward. And for the first time in years, Alina felt no weight on her shoulders. Only peace. Images. Because she understood something deeper than ever before. One signature may have belonged to her father, but the legacy belonged to everyone who had ever been overlooked. Images. And thanks to a janitor's daughter, the world would never again be blind to them. Alina's life had changed more than she could have imagined. Images. What began as a daughter's fight for her father's dignity had grown into something much larger. A national conversation. Images. Newspapers called her the janitor's daughter who challenged giants. Universities invited her to speak. Workers in other industries reached out, telling her their stories. Images. Their forgotten promises. But with recognition came a price. Late one night, she returned to her apartment after a long day of speaking engagements. The moment she entered, she froze. Images, her papers, her father's contract, the testimonies she'd collected, were scattered across the floor. The lock had been forced. Someone had been inside. Her chest tightened. Images. She dropped to her knees, frantically checking. The contract was still there, slightly crumpled but untouched. Relief washed over her, but fear lingered. Images. Whoever had come and wanted her to know she wasn't untouchable. The next morning, she sat across from the CEO in a small office. The once intimidating woman now seemed more like a mentor. Images. Her eyes filled with concern. "They're trying to scare you," the CEO said, her tone low. "But if you back down now, everything you've built will crumble." Alina clenched her fists. Images. "I'm not afraid for myself. I'm afraid they'll erase everything. My father's name, the people we've helped. I can't let that happen." The CEO gave a faint smile. Images. "Then you've already won. Fear only has power if you let it silence you." Those words carried her through the storm. But storms don't pass quickly. Images. At a televised debate about corporate responsibility, Alina faced one of her fiercest critics, a slick-tongued investor named Mr. Harrow. He leaned into the microphone, smirking. Images. "This young woman wants us to believe that janitors, cafeteria workers, and security guards are just as important as executives. But let's be honest, they are not. This is a business." Images, not a charity. Gasps rippled through the audience. All eyes turned to Alina. She felt her pulse quicken, but then her father's voice echoed in her heart. She lifted her chin. Images. "My father worked nights for 30 years, so people like you could walk into clean offices every morning. He never asked for charity. He asked for dignity." Images. "If you think people like him are less important, then you've forgotten what makes us human. A company is not built on stock prices. It's built on people." Images. All of them. The audience erupted in applause. Mr. Harrow's smirk faded. That clip spread across social media, turning into a rallying cry. Dignity. Images, not charity. But fame is a double-edged sword. Strangers began treating Alina as a hero, but she still carried the weight of grief. At night, when the world quieted, Images. She missed her father more than words could express. She longed for his laugh, for the way he always saved the last piece of bread for her, for his simple wisdom. One evening, overwhelmed. Images. She returned to the building where he had worked. The janitors on duty recognized her immediately. One of them, a young man, shyly approached. Miss Alina, he said softly. Images. I used to work with your father. He once told me not to quit school, even though I was ready to drop out. Because of him, I finished. Images. Now I'm working here to pay for college. Alina's throat tightened. She realized her father's legacy wasn't only in her hands. It lived in every person he had touched. Months later, Images. She stood at a grand event organized in honor of the Raza initiative. The hall was filled with workers, families, executives, reporters. On stage, a banner read, Images. Dignity for all. When she stepped up to the microphone, her hands trembled. She took a deep breath and began. My father never thought his life would inspire change. Images. He was just a janitor. But he taught me the greatest lesson, that no human being is invisible. Tonight, I don't just see his face in my memory. Images. I see him in all of you, the ones who work quietly, without applause, without recognition, but without whom nothing could function. This movement is not mine. Images. It belongs to you. Tears filled her eyes as the crowd rose to their feet, applauding, chanting her father's name. Somewhere deep inside, she felt him. Not as a memory, but as a presence. Images. She smiled through her tears and whispered, We did it, Baba. For the first time in her life, Alina understood something greater than victory. Images. Her father's story was not just about one man. It was about every unsung hero. And because she refused to be silent, the world would never again forget them. Images. The janitor's daughter had turned pain into power, loss into legacy. And her father's signature, once hidden in dusty files, had become a symbol of dignity that could never be erased. Images. The applause from the Dignity for All event echoed in her ears long after the night ended. But when the lights dimmed and the cameras turned away, Alina sat alone in her small apartment. Images. Staring at the framed photo of her father. Am I really strong enough for this, Baba? She whispered. Images. I fought for you. But now it feels like the whole world is watching me. The silence of the room offered no answer, only the faint hum of the city outside. In the weeks that followed, Images. The movement grew far beyond her control. Other companies began creating their own worker initiatives. Labor unions reached out, asking her to speak at rallies. Images. Politicians quoted her words in speeches. For many, Alina had become the face of fairness, the voice of the unseen. But the bigger the light, the darker the shadows behind it. One morning, Images. As she arrived at the office, she was met by a crowd of reporters shouting questions. Someone had leaked a story. Images. The janitor's daughter profits off father's death. Headlines accused her of using her father's legacy for fame and wealth. Anonymous voices on the internet twisted her story. Images. Claiming she was backed by powerful interests, that she was no better than the executives she fought against. Her chest tightened as she read the words. They weren't true, but lies spread faster than truth. Inside the building, the CEO found her sitting in a quiet corner, pale and shaken. Alina. The CEO said gently. Images. You can't let this break you. They fear you, and fear makes people cruel. But what if they're right? Alina whispered, her voice trembling. Images. What if I've made this about me? The CEO shook her head firmly. No. You gave them a voice. You carried your father's story so others could be seen. Images. That's not selfish. It's brave. Don't let them take that away from you. Alina closed her eyes, forcing back tears. For the first time, Images. She realized the movement wasn't hers to control anymore. It belonged to the people who believed in it. And then came betrayal. Images. A man she trusted, a junior manager who had once praised her work, stood on live television and declared that Alina was manipulating workers and using emotional stories to pressure the company. He claimed the initiative was draining resources. Images. Costing jobs and endangering growth. Alina watched the broadcast in disbelief, her fists clenched. He had sat in her meetings, nodded at her words, even thanked her privately. Images. Now he was stabbing her in the back for his own promotion. That night, she returned to the rooftop of her father's building, clutching the old contract. She let the tears fall freely. Images. I'm losing, Baba. They're turning everyone against me. But then she remembered the worker, who had told her how her father once encouraged him to finish school. Images. She remembered the cafeteria lady, who wept when the initiative paid her medical bills. She remembered the janitors who now walked with pride, no longer invisible. She wiped her tears. No, she whispered. I can't let them erase this. Not again. The next day, she walked into the office, shoulders straight, eyes blazing. Images. When reporters cornered her with accusations, she didn't dodge. My father's story is not a weapon, she said firmly. It is a mirror. If it makes you uncomfortable. Images. It's because you've looked away from the truth for too long. This isn't about me. It's about every worker who has been forgotten. If that frightens people in power. Images. Then maybe it should. The clip went viral. Her words, raw and unshaken, reignited the fire of the movement. Thousands gathered in peaceful marches, holding signs with a simple phrase. We are not invisible. But Alina knew the battle wasn't over. She sat with the CEO late one evening, the city lights glowing through the windows. Images. You've changed this company, the CEO said. But I think you're meant for more. The world needs voices like yours, voices that remind us of dignity, not just profit. Alina frowned softly. Are you saying politics? The CEO smiled faintly. I'm saying leadership, whatever form it takes. The thought unsettled her. Images. She never wanted power. She only wanted justice for her father. But now she saw that his story had become a spark that could light fires far beyond what she imagined. Images. Alina returned once more to her father's grave. She knelt by the stone, tracing his name with her fingers. I didn't ask for this path, Baba, she whispered. Images. But maybe this is where I'm meant to go. Not just for you, but for everyone who never got the chance to be heard. The wind stirred gently, rustling the trees. In her heart, Images. She felt his presence again, not as a memory, but as strength. Alina stood, her eyes filled with quiet determination. She was no longer just the janitor's daughter. Images. She was the keeper of countless voices, the fighter for dignity, the reminder that no one is ever truly invisible. And as she walked away from the grave that night, she knew her journey wasn't ending. It was only beginning.